Welcome, audience, to this 14th episode of Polaris for Dissidents. Today, I, Alexander Wolf-Heese, will be giving a short introduction on the topic of global warming. The topic, of course, chosen appropriate to conclude this season of Polaris podcast before our summer break, appropriate to the reality of the Northern Hemisphere, which, of course, is baking in heat waves. At least North America and Europe are to a large degree. And I'll be giving a traditionalist take on the basis of an essay that I wrote a few months back called Washington. One part of that essay, the links, by the way, will be given in the comment section and as a pinned comment to this podcast. A small part of this essay has been dedicated by me to, let's say, ecopolitics. And I'll be giving a traditionalist take on this matter. Now, this sounds perhaps a little bit contradictory, because how it's possible to give a traditionalist take on a very modernist phenomenon, global warming, is dead, both in the kinetic sense as well as in the narrative sense. We'll be coming back to that as well. But it is definitely possible to find a traditionalist stance on ecology in many works of the 20th century traditionalist school. Also, it should be recognized that within the dissident right, within which, of course, traditionalism is one of its pillars, within the dissident right too, there have been quite many people dedicated to deep ecological thinking, ecological philosophy even. I remind people of the role played by Linkula, for example, in that regard. And we can also go back to a more controversial thinker, Savitri Devi Mukherjee, and I'll be quoting from her, starting by a little paragraph on ecopolitics. So she writes, "Today or soon, perhaps tomorrow, we will witness on a planetary scale the realization of the sacrilegious dream of all the devotees of anthropocentrism. That is, the triumph of the human anthill over the savanna, over the desert, and over all the terrestrial spaces where superior man in the past could still be alone, and where he could in the past still be communicating with eternity through visible beauty and innocent contact with life, untainted by speech." Thus far, Savitri Devi. Now, I'm continuing here with a take on the issue of global warming, which comes from, let's say, the cultural historical development of matriarchy. So for me, the phenomenon of global warming is linked to the descent, I would say, of the collective West into neo-matriarchal political, social, and cultural rule. And this, of course, is a quite controversial topic, but I hope it becomes evident how these links work. So, in my view, the geopolitical trajectory of the collective West is paralleled by an ecopolitical trajectory in the same direction. And the direction, in both cases, implies the demonic desacralization of Gaia. So, Gaia, of course, being humanity's Mother Earth habitat. And the desecration of this habitat is something that is visible in geopolitics as well as ecopolitics. So I write, the same decades that saw the realization of neo-matriarchy in the collective West were also the decades that saw the realization of planetary scale ecocide through consumerist-driven environmental degradation. Since the defeat of techno-futurism and techno-idealism in the Second World War, so techno-futurism and future idealism as represented in the Axis powers. After that defeat, these two idea forms, idea tendencies, were replaced by what I call techno-consumerism and techno-totalitarianism. And of course, the height of both techno-consumerism and techno-totalitarianism is what in French language is called the Trente Glorieuses, so the 30 beautiful years from about approximately 1950 to 1980. In that period, the West, in my view, the Western masses, they were reconditioned into a state of neo-matriarchy. Of course, the roots, cultural historical roots, go back further, but this is the time when the mindset on the collective level was decisively altered. Of course, the example of the Western masses is eagerly followed by the previously so-called deprived masses of the Third World. In any case, this collective descent into neo-matriarchy has led humanity into the uncharted territory of global-scale environmental degradation and anthropogenic climate change. Historically, runaway femocracy and runaway ecocide have developed in tandem, reinforcing each other in a vicious circle of short-sighted materialism, careless hedonism, infantile irresponsibility, and deliberate cognitive dissidence. So these, of course, materialism, hedonism, irresponsibility, and dissonance are things that are associated with matriarchy. So, going by a few available authentic scientific accounts of climate change, this self-reinforcing feedback loop caused the planetary ecosystem to breach a point of no return somewhere around 1980. Elsewhere, I have talked about this period, 1978, 1980, around these years, as the ABBA years, of course, referring to the Swedish pop group ABBA, which was famous in those years, but also, of course, the ABBA sequence is also very symbolic because it means you progress from A to B and then regress from B to A backwards. I point here to the fact that elsewhere I've alluded to the kinetic and symbolic markers of what followed, namely, let's say, the Western world's descent into underworldly conditions. And these, in my view, have been facilitated, and it suffices to say here, by three male inventions, important inventions that have shaped the modern world: the automobile, the aeroplane, and air conditioning, so the three A's, which of course have a great environmental impact. So from that point onwards, I'm talking about, let's say 1980, the fixed slit, I say here, of femocratic rule in the cultural sphere, stifling every movement towards political correction, has been matched by the fixed slit of global warming in the natural sphere. And this means that emissions, in quotation marks, of consumerism have been trapped in the Earth's atmosphere in what we could call a fatal greenhouse effect feedback loop. To illustrate the point from a symbolic point of view, it may be useful to revisit the structural culture-nature oppositions that cultural anthropology uses. So, of course, cultural anthropology is a field that is now defunct effectively, but it gave us scientists many useful models with which to explain cultural phenomena. And it allows us not only to describe traditional societies, but also to understand our own society better. So if we apply cultural anthropological oppositions, culture-nature oppositions, to the present situation, to the democratic predicament of contemporary humanity, globalized humanity, of course, then we see that in cultural anthropology, these opposites are matched by the opposites male-female, patriarchy, matriarchy, culture, civilization, community, society. So these are oppositions that are analytically matched by natural categories as well. So we have the opposition cold-hot, dry-wet, light-dark, white-black. And these, the systematic application of these natural and cultural oppositions allow cultural anthropologists, if they do their job correctly, to decipher many social identity issues, including totemic, what are called totemic oppositions, and cosmological narratives, which of course are called mythologies. So in contemporary globalized humanity, the masculine principle, which is the plus principle, wanes as the masculine identities are eliminated. And the feminine principle, the minus principle, waxes and feminine identities become dominant. So, even as patriarchal order disintegrates into matriarchal chaos, cultural continuity is drowned in civilizational meltdown and communal securities are replaced by societal experiments. This also means that natural balances are fatally compromised. So, feminine heat replaces masculine cold. Summer temperatures rise to absurd levels, winter landscapes recede into distant memory, ice caps and glaciers melt, sea ice and snow cover disappears, sea levels rise, drowning island nations, air humidity increases, raising wet bulb temperatures, and the daylight gets increasingly contrailed, dimmed, and even the night sky disappears by light pollution. So slowly but surely, as greenhouse gases accumulate and anthropogenic aerosols proliferate, subtropical regions are turned into uninhabitable deserts, mid-latitude temperate zones lose their agricultural seasons, and the eternal ice caps of the poles give way to shipping lanes for whatever cruising baby boomers, tourists, and northern passage cargo entrepreneurs. Even as the cold, masculine side of nature is boiled away, the hot, feminine sphere of nature boils over, to the point that the punishments of sulfur and brimstone and the warnings of eternal fire, which are found in long-forgotten Holy Scripture, are laughed away as fairy tale fantasies by the enlightened masses. Still, they are becoming kinetic realities. Then the final thought, applicable, of course, to the Venus syndrome title of this paragraph. It should be known that it should be reminded that long ago the planet Venus, Earth's neighbor and the inspiration of beautiful visions historically from the Sumerian star of Ishtar to Van Gogh's Starry Night. This planet Venus was long rumored to have been the Earth's twin sister. But then it fell prey to a runaway greenhouse effect that caused an atmospheric carbon dioxide level of 96.5%, which of course trapped solar energy on the surface of Venus to the point of boiling away its oceans, raising its surface temperature to above the melting point of lead, tin and zinc. And in this way, Venus, the beautiful morning star, which is dedicated to the pinnacle of female divinity, covered herself in a shroud of sulfur under which only Lucifer can still operate. But if men are from Mars and women are from Venus, then the Earth, appropriately positioned between them, belongs to both. This is their meeting place, and this is the habitat that is balanced in the way that is required for the children of men. So don't look up business as usual escapism and beta male billionaire Mars flight fantasies will not do if the Venus syndrome is to be avoided for the Earth. Starting in the West, overreaching females must stand down, enslaved men must stand up, the ancient balance between them must be restored, and a new bond between them and their creator must be sealed. And I conclude here with a few words of the greatest poem of Holy Scripture, which is of course from the Song of Songs, and with the hope that there is some power in these words after all, which is just of course a love song. Place me like a seal over your heart, like a seal on your arm. Song of Songs 8.7. Thus far. Thank you.
Welcome, viewers, for another episode of the Polaris for Dissidents podcast. And today we will be talking about climate change or global warming. And we are all going to try and give a little bit of a different perspective on this phenomenon. So we will not be talking about whether it's the result of of some grand conspiracy or whatever, or at least I assume we will not be talking about that. And I think there are a lot of interesting things to say about this. And at the beginning of this program, we already heard the introduction made by Alexander Wolf-Heze, and he gives a very traditionalist perspective on global warming or climate change. And well, I think that we are ready to comment on at least the intro and give our preliminary remarks about the entire phenomenon of global warming. And I'd like to start with Michael.
Thank you. Well, I was a bit surprised if I understood Alexander correctly. Maybe he can correct me if I'm wrong, but you are actually taking the idea that the globe is suffering runaway warming quite seriously. Is that correct, Alexander?
Yes, that's true, but I'm not taking it seriously from a point of view of science because I'm not a scientist. I'm not a climate scientist, not somebody that can judge the evidence. I'm taking it seriously from a traditionalist perspective. That means from a traditionalist philosophical perspective. It makes sense to me that such a thing would happen, and it would make sense to me that it would have a kinetic aspect. This means that it would, let's say, manifest itself in kinetic forms.
Okay, thank you. Well, I mean, climate change is a very fuzzy term, right? I mean, the climate has undergone very radical changes in the past, long before humanity was either numerous enough or technologically advanced enough to wreak any kind of havoc on the world's climate. We can, for example, just simply look at the ice age cycles, right? So we have every about 125,000 years, a warm period that lasts for some 10 to 25,000 years. We are currently in such a warm period, and the previous one was the Eemian, which was 125,000 years ago, of shorter duration, but actually warmer than it is today by several degrees, right? So we have still not reached the maximum temperature that was reached 125 years and 125,000 years ago, excuse me, obviously due to purely natural causes. And when I became seriously worried about climate change and global warming, I actually started to look into the mechanism of the ice age cycles first, because that is obviously a very profound kind of climate change. So my assumption was that if we can discern and get worked up over the human contribution to recent climate change, then we must first understand the natural baseline, including its variations. So I try to understand what is known about the mechanism of the ice age cycle. And imagine my surprise if I found out that there is absolutely no scientific consensus on what drives the ice age cycle. To this day, there is no consensus theory of such an important natural phenomenon of climate change as the ice age cycles. It is not understood what drives them. Okay. And so that means we have no way of explaining and therefore predicting natural climate change as it evolves through time. So therefore, if we observe any kind of climate change, then we always have to assume, okay, so there may be a human contribution, but we cannot measure it because there is this unknown quantity of natural climate change. So the science is far from settled. It is anything but settled. You get told all the science is settled and this kind of thing. That is a total misrepresentation of the actual state of the field. That is the very first observation. And then also I moved on to frequenting several global warming skeptic websites, to which scientists from various fields made the contributions. An important website of that kind is What's Up With That? which was set up by a retired meteorologist, Anthony Watts, from the United States. And I became convinced from the science that I found there that carbon dioxide, which is usually represented as the major culprit, right, human-induced carbon dioxide emissions, is a very unconvincing driver of major global warming, right? The calculations that are based on the calculations, the predictions of the temperature changes due to certain underlying changes in carbon dioxide concentrations, they seem to be always wildly exaggerated. Okay, there are assumptions in these models that are just simply wildly implausible, right? Some kind of feedback loops and so on. Most likely we don't have positive but negative feedback of growing carbon dioxide concentration. So this is sort of a self-limiting affair. So I'm absolutely unconvinced that human-induced climate change is very significant at this point. And if it is significant, I'm very unconvinced that carbon dioxide emissions are the major driver. It is more likely that things such as deforestation and so on are more important than that. Okay, agricultural use of large swathes of spaces of land and so on. And I'm absolutely unconvinced that the phenomenon has reached some kind of apocalyptic stage. I think everything that humans have done so far can be addressed, and as far as it is of major concern, it can be reverted. Absolutely. There's no reason for panic. There is no reason for last days pessimism. Absolutely unneeded. And I think it is actually a propped up agenda of fake science that is used to drive a political agenda.
Yes, indeed. And I would actually like to add to that the latest IPCC report actually came out and said that the predictions that they made for global warming in the past were wildly, exaggerated and too high. And so even the scientists that were involved in creating a lot of the hype around climate change and global warming now actually come out and say, well, we have to adjust that because it simply isn't happening. And as concerned to the CO2 is very strange that it is quite clear that we have roughly 400 parts per million of CO2 in our atmosphere currently. But this is not enough for certain plant growers and food growers, so they pump carbon dioxide into their greenhouses to the extent that they reach 2,000 to 2,500 ppm in these greenhouses. And historically, we know from ice core drillings and stuff that atmospheric CO2 has been as high as 4,000 ppm. And even higher. And life was bigger. We had bigger trees, bigger plants, and bigger animals. So CO2, what is very strange, has been declared the enemy of mankind and a pollutant, but it isn't, in fact, the gas of life. And this is what I would like to. There's a German term, and it is called Verdinglichung, and in English it is reification, and it is. There is a certain premise made, and then there are policies implemented and societal changes and educational programs, and the train starts running, but nobody stops to ask if the initial premise is even correct. And it becomes so dogmatic that you cannot even doubt the initial premise, while it is obviously quite toxic. So, Charles, would you like to comment?
Yeah, but I'm taking a totally different approach to this article of
Yes, of course.
Of Alexander's. First, I want to ask Alexander just a brief question. This section that we're looking at today is called the Venus Syndrome. Is this a reference to the China Syndrome, the movie about the nuclear plant meltdown, the one with Michael Douglas and Jane Fonda?
Well, of course, the Venus syndrome refers to the greenhouse effect in scientific terms, the greenhouse effect that's observable on the planet Venus. But of course, I don't apply it there in any naturalistic way. I'm looking at it as a problem of femininity and masculinity, a cosmological problem. That means that cosmological balance is out of whack. And then all kinds of strange phenomena can start to appear, manifest themselves in our live world. So I am not somebody that adheres to the scientific view that materialistic explanations are called for or even to be prioritized over any other. I would even say that the human experience on the planet seems to me predicated on, let's say, a cosmological cycle that does not necessarily imply human understanding. So human understanding of our human fate, perhaps yes, but as humanity's fate as a whole, it is not necessarily something that can be scientifically explained or should be scientifically explained. The fact of the matter is that the Venus syndrome, in my view, is most properly understood as, let's say, the elimination of the female, of the male force from planet Earth, which would be, in naturalistic terms, explain heat as a force that drives out life. And it is for me very interesting to see that the global warming phenomenon, which is a kind of a modern mythology, Michael rightly pointed out that it's a very controversial topic, in fact, and global warming is not a scientifically established fact as such. Certainly, its causes are not to be determined, but apparently, this narrative plays a very large role in modern society, and I think that's not a coincidence, and that's what I'm trying to draw attention to with this essay. Of course, it is possible that there are certain material reflections of, let's say, cosmological principles of another kind. So, non-materialistic cosmological cycle can manifest itself in materialistic ways. So that wouldn't surprise me that there would be such a thing as a real global warming occurring, whatever the cause of that might be. And I think it's very interesting to go back in the past, like Michael said, look at natural cycles. There was such a thing that most people do not understand very well, but it has been described by scientists as something as the great oxidification cycle. So there has been a period in the Earth's existence, apparently, according to scientists, that much more oxygen was put in the atmosphere than there was before, and that certain life forms became extinct because of that. So there are bacterial forms that cannot thrive in an oxygen atmosphere, and they were eliminated from the Earth's life cycle because of this oxidation event. And I think that's very interesting. That means that there is apparently on this Earth a principle that certain materialistic forces, material forces, affect life on this Earth, greater material forces than caused by this life. So apparently this oxidification event has its cause in microbial life. So certain microbes started producing oxygen and eradicated by these other life forms from this planet. So in my view, it is conceivable that human life is destined to eliminate itself as part of a larger cosmological cycle. So I think it is not impossible that global warming could actually lead to the elimination of human life. Of course, that is only to be understood here, or what I'm saying from a traditionalist point of view. It makes sense as the end of the human presence on the planet as part of a larger downward cosmological cycle. And I think that there is a scientific thesis that corresponds to that. It's called the Medea thesis. Most people haven't heard of it, perhaps. There is the Gaia thesis, which posits the planet Earth as a living, breathing organism, Gaia. But there's also the Medea thesis, which proposes that multicellular life is always destined to eliminate itself on the planet Earth at some point or another. That's biological and a scientific thesis. In any case, that's just my take, and sorry for the long answer.
Yeah, the slant that I wanted to take on this has to do with your repeated criticism of feminine rule or matriarchal civilization. So I'm just going to read a few of the expressions you used and then expand on that. So you say the realization of neo-matriarchy, runaway femocracy, democratic rule, democratic commitment, the feminine principle waxes and feminine ideas become dominant, patriarchal order disintegrates into matriarchic chaos, and overreaching females must stand down, enslaved men must stand up. So these statements made me think of the 19th century Swiss scholar Johann Jakob Bachofen, 1815 to 1887, and his book Mutterrecht, or Mother Right in English, which centers on his theories concerning an alleged prehistoric matriarchal society. And there's some characteristic passages I'd like to read from this to see if any of you gentlemen have any comments or see any connections between this and what Alexander is saying. And this is actually from a book entitled Myth, Religion, and Mother Right, which has large selections from Mutterrecht in it. So, for example, on pages 91 to 92, Bachofen says, matriarchy is entirely subservient to matter and to the phenomena of natural life, from which it derives laws of its inner and outward existence. More strongly than later generations, the matriarchal peoples feel the unity of all life, harmony of these, which they have not yet outgrown. They are more keenly aware of the pain of death and the fragility of Tellurian existence, lamented by woman and particularly the mother. They yearn more fervently for higher consolation, which they find in the phenomena of natural life. And they relate this consolation to the generative womb, to conceiving, sheltering, nurturing mother love. No era has attached and so little to the inner spiritual factor. In a word, matriarchal existence is regulated naturalism. Its thinking is material, its development predominantly physical. So Alexander, let's see, get back to her. Okay. It seems as if you're putting sort of the responsibility for global warming on the feminine element of existence, if we have a duality between feminine and masculine. Is that true?
Well, I would call it a feminization process. So, and the feminization process, of course, actively influences men as well. So it's men that invented technologies that serve matriarchy and feminine life. So I quoted in my essay the 3 A's, the automobile, the aeroplane, and the air conditioner. They are male inventions. They serve to make possible matriarchy. And ironically, they are responsible for what people call CO2 emissions. Now, whether these emissions do actually contribute to global warming, I do not know. But certainly, there is a principle of heat involved of all of them. They are fossil fuel technologies. Burning of fuel is used for activating these devices. And they serve feminine comforts, and they create an environment in which the female can thrive in a very convenient way, because she does not have to face the necessity of male assistance. I mean, she can drive a car herself, she can be flown by a plane, and she can turn on a machine which she didn't invent herself, called the air conditioning. So I find this quite interesting approach that most people do not use, they do not understand. They think we are living in a patriarchal society created by male. And on the physical level, that might be true. And on the technological level, that might be true. But I think the end state is a matriarchy. That's what I wanted to add.
All right. So
it just seems as if Bachofen. Oh, go ahead. but
No,
that's fine.
yeah, so we, yeah, Hans.
Thanks. Thanks, Alexander, for this illuminating view on history of the Western world, especially in the 20th century. And I have a few sort of side remarks. First of all, is the question that comes to mind is how come there is this feminist revolution? There's this drive towards femocracy or matriarchy or whatever you want to call it. How come the sudden feminization of Western society? You alluded to the loss of the German Reich in the Second World War, which may be true, but then the question remains unanswered. How come? Why does feminist thought or femocracy come up and comes to the fore? And how come women are taken over everywhere? The second thing is that you talk about male inventions and you single out the automobile, air conditioning, and the aeroplane. As far as I'm concerned, all inventions are male inventions. There are simply no female inventions. Maybe the ironing device to iron your shirt, or maybe the washing machine, whatever, or the dishwasher. I've heard that those are feminine inventions. But other than that, there are no feminine inventions that I can come up with. That I can think of. All inventions are male, all of them. At least all of them that have been done in the West and that have contributed to the rise of civilization in the West. And of those inventions, most of them are German or French, but especially German, as far as I'm concerned. So there's the second thing. And the third thing is, why is it so important to talk about the weather? Because actually we don't know anything about the weather. To be very sort of specific, weather is measured by these little instruments in little white wooden cases that you can see sometimes. They have sort of slotted windows on the side, and they're all the same structure, and they can be found all over the place. And they're standard measuring sort of devices or sort of housing for measuring climate change or climate sort of events like temperature, wind, etc., etc., etc. And those things determine our knowledge of climate. And they have been around only since the 1920s. They were used in concurrence with the development of aviation. So before aviation, we have no secure information on the climate in the world at all. So we only have about 100 years of sort of accurate measurements of climate and of weather. And on that basis, some people have ventured to make predictions or assertions on past weather conditions or whatever. It's all nonsense. Basically, to me, so scientifically speaking, there is no knowledge about the weather before the 1920s, period. So everything we say about the weather is just nonsense. And that remains, sort of brings us back to what you said, to the cultural sort of significance of what you said. The question must be answered: why does femininity or the femocracy come up during the 19th century? It's 20th century, sorry.
Well, this is of course the key question, but from a traditionalist point of view, this is very easy to answer. There's a cosmological cycle. The cycle involves the, let's say, progressive obscuring of the transcendental sphere. So the immanization of the life. So transcendental access being limited, transcendental experience being eliminated finally, and immanent forms of experience of life only remaining on Earth, accessible to whatever is left of humanity. So according to the traditionalist view, We are living in the Kali Yuga, the last age, the Iron Age. And it stands to reason that in that period, the male principle, I talked about the cultural anthropological, let's say, oppositions. So heaven and earth, then of course, man stands to heaven as woman, female stands to earth. Man stands to reason as he stands to heaven, and female stands to emotion as she stands to earth. These are very well-known parallels and oppositions. So femocracy is a logical outcome of the cycle. Eventually, the male principle has to be eliminated because it can give access to, let's say, heavenly knowledge, rational imposition of categories on the earth, and the maintenance of traditional structures of transmission of knowledge, transmission of awareness, and transmission of philosophy. So the final elimination of these access points to the traditional transcendental sphere, this depends on the elimination of the male principle from politics, economics, all spheres of life. And it stands to reason that the female principle has to show itself and has to grow proportionally. I think it has done so for many centuries, but we are reaching, of course, the absolute end point of this. And the end point is that male presence is no longer possible in the world. So, for example, physically, this is also true. We all know that male reproduction depends on a very tiny balance of temperature. And above a certain temperature, male reproduction possibilities become zero. I mean, this is very well shown in the natural world. And of course, the male principle stands for the cold principle. It stands for the ice principle opposed to the warm principle and the heat principle. So from a cultural anthropological point of view, you can understand these traditionalist theses very well. Now, of course, you also make another point, and that's about inventions, female inventions. Of course, the female is the earth. She doesn't have to invent anything. She represents the earth itself. The male is just merely a guest. He is, let's say, a representative of a higher transcendental principle in a lower sphere. So he has to invent things in order to make order, in order to make a whole. The female, she is earth and she is whole. She doesn't need to do anything. And of course, there was your last point that was about the climate measurement and the weather measurement. And I fully agree with you. I believe that weather and climate, they are important now only, of course, also an economic agenda. There are people pushing the climate change agenda and want to earn money by it, and they need data for this. But I think there is another reason as well. As progressively humanity has no longer access to the transcendental sphere, they have to explain everything that happens to them and around them in materialistic terms. They need to measure everything. They need to observe everything and express them in scientific, so-called scientific categories. So that's no wonder that they start to measure things. People before didn't need maps. They just lived on the earth. They didn't need weather data. They just experienced the weather. But I do believe that at the end of the cosmological cycle, the only thing people can still understand are exactly these scientific measurements. They can understand the temperature going up in scientific terms. They cannot understand the causes of these temperature rises. They cannot understand the causes of their heated and unpleasant condition. And these causes are much more important than, let's say, what I call the symptoms of heating, that the subjective experience of heat that many people have, whatever its reasons. That's how I would answer that.
Yes, thank you, Alexander. Charles, you were in the process of answering before I gave the turn to Hans. So if you would like to continue.
Well, I would say, yeah, thanks. I would say that I agree in part with what Alexander's saying, and I disagree in part. And where I disagree has to do with the symbolism of the feminine and the masculine. For example, in Chinese Taoism, the feminine is associated with cold, not with heat. The masculine is associated with heat. Uh, so, for example, the feminine is associated with the moon, the earth, water, night, and winter, and those are yin qualities, and that's feminine. The masculine is associated with the active, the sun, fire, and these are yang qualities. These are masculine qualities. So that would be the opposite of the argument that Alexander is making there from the Taoist perspective. From the perspective that there is an obsession with the environment, I think maybe that is an essentially feminine obsession. Just going back to Backhofen from Mutterecht, another quote here, in which he emphasizes sort of the mother's connection with physicality and with nature. He states on page 109, the mother's connection with the child is based on a material relationship. It is accessible to sense perception and remains always a natural truth. But the father, as begetter, presents an entirely different aspect. Standing in no visible relation to the child, he can never, even in the marital relation, cast off a certain fictive character. Belonging to the offspring only through the mediation of the mother, he, the father, always appears as the remoter potency. All the sublimation of human existence over the laws of material life. While the principle of motherhood is common to all spheres of Tellurian life, man, by the preponderant position he accords to the begetting potency, emerges from this relationship and becomes conscious of his higher calling. Spiritual life rises over corporeal existence, and the relation with the lower spheres of existence is restricted to the physical aspect. Maternity pertains to the physical side of man. The only thing he shares with the animals. The paternal. This seems to be consistent with what Alexander's arguing, because the obsession with the environment and climate change or global warming, or whatever term you want to use, is an obsession with the physical world. And it's almost a religion. I mean, I've argued before that it is a kind of religion which replaces, in people who have no sense of true religion, this need that all humans have for a spiritual side of existence. A big narrative, a narrative that you can't really put your finger on. I mean, there are all these debatable qualities of so-called climate change, and the data can be interpreted in a lot of different ways. But there's just a belief, there's sort of a desire to have Mother Earth be the principle that guides us all and brings us all together. So that's what I would say. I mean, I disagree with one aspect of his argument, and I agree with another.
All right, thanks, Charles. So I always like to throw in a little bit of conspiracy. And when we are talking about climate change, we have to go back to, let's say, the 50s, beginning of the 60s, where the Club of Rome in Europe, or at least this is one of those fancy clubs of the globalists, had a document in which they actually explicitly stated that they needed an enemy of all of mankind. They weren't ready to fit this into a narrative of aliens and UFOs, but climate change, they agreed, or at least global warming, or at least a major impact on the environment by human beings, was agreed upon as the major fitting enemy they could use to sell a world government to the human population, because only together can we solve these complex problems, and so there is, I think, very much a conspiratorial origin to these things, because it is so wildly implausible, the entire theory of global warming, just as acid rain was, or the holes in the ozone layer, and the coming ice age, and all of these things that we have had, which didn't come to pass. The comet that was going to smash us all. And now, I'm not saying there isn't going to be any impactful event, but this is so obviously wrong and false. But it's still being driven by all of the institutions in Europe, at least, and I guess you could say in the Western world, that there is an engine driving this that is not just for money but for control and to get to their world government. So I think this is much more in line with the thinking of Michael. So I was very much interested in your perspective.
Yeah, thank you, Sietse. Yeah, I agree with you. You also have to consider what is going on, for example, in academia, right? I mean, what happens to researchers that openly question the imposed dogma of global warming? They will lose their funding in a hurry. It will take about 5 minutes for them to be cut off all funding and to be given no more access. Journal editors have been canned. Entire journals have been destroyed simply for daring to publish one skeptical paper. Okay, this is how it's imposed. And I mean, on the other hand, if you go along with the agenda, as a school, for example, if you apply to your regional government, you want to set up a brand new university department of climate studies and this kind of thing, and you make it clear you subscribe to all the dogma, then this building will go up in a hurry. I've seen it in my own old university. There was really not much money for anything else, but as soon as some sort of environmental agenda was proposed, the funding always came through, right? It was always these dubious newfangled sciencey things that got the funding. We also got a brand new department of nanotechnology, for example, and what was going on there research-wise, it was pretty strange, I can tell you. So it is clearly agenda driven. It is clearly agenda driven, and the science is bent out of shape. And I mean, if it were all about money, I mean, then obviously somebody would simply try to sell an expensive solution. But there are no solutions to climate change. The only solution to climate change is to destroy industrial science as society. That is the solution. There is no technical solution that is being acceptable. For example, I mean, even before this climate change scam, so I would call it that, started, the Club of Rome and its confederates, they made a point of destroying atomic energy. Why is that? Because if you want to pass off the consumption of fossil fuels as a big sin against the environment, then an obvious solution would be to reduce that fossil fuel dependence and simply rely on cheap and abundant energy from nuclear power stations. But this had to be destroyed first. So we had, for example, the fake incident in 3 Miles Island, and I think it was 1979. Right, this one reactor in the United States that supposedly went haywire. It is not correct. Some nuclear engineer, Galen Windsor, you may have seen him online. So there are some nice videos of him. He apparently inspected the premises by himself, he and a friend of his, also from the same discipline, and they came to the conclusion that this was all staged. There was no genuine technical failure. It was all just simply prearranged. It was prearranged. And the Russians have figured out that the reactor in Chernobyl, for example, 7 years later, 1986, was also sabotaged. They have figured out in detail exactly how it was sabotaged. So it's apparently not just plainly a vague conspiracy theory, but a very specific one. Right. So, and I think this blowing up Chernobyl, I mean, it was strategically located. It was located near an important radar installation of the Soviet Union. It was at the border of Ukraine and Belarus. So it really greatly helped to destabilize the Soviet Union. And at the same time, it helped to discredit nuclear power once more, right? Some more. We had in both Germany and France in the 70s very determined efforts to further develop nuclear energy. Germany, I would say, was at the time leading the world in nuclear technology. They had developed 2 advanced reactor types. One was the fast breeder. They built up a breeder it was all you had to do was simply turn the key, but it was not permitted. It was not permitted to turn that key, so the reactor was just simply, after it had been completed, it never went online. Then they had the thorium reactor, which is quite interesting because thorium, as an alternative nuclear fuel, is actually about 3 times more abundant on the globe than is uranium. At the same time, thorium reactors produce far less long-lived radioactive waste than uranium reactors do. Okay, Germany had a 300 megawatts prototype, so that's about a quarter of industrial size reactor type, and that was successfully run for a couple of years. Then there was another fake failure, apparently some absolutely insurmountable thing, some fuel element got stuck somewhere, and apparently this difficulty could not be resolved by any means, so the reactor had to be shut down and the successor reactor could not be built. If you look into the literature, into the reports of the engineers that actually oversaw this project, they simply say it was an unqualified success. It was a very successful prototype, and it could have served as the basis for developing full-scale industrial thorium reactors. Okay, so nuclear power was a mature technology 50 years ago. That's the upshot of it. It was a mature technology 50 years ago, and there were reactor types that had negligible risk of actually going haywire or melting down or anything like that. There hasn't been a genuine reactor meltdown accident of any kind worldwide since this technology actually began to be built. So the entire narrative of nuclear energy being totally irresponsible and too risky and dangerous, it's bullshit of the same caliber as the entire global warming narrative. So these are two complementary bullshit narratives that have been used to dismantle the prosperity of Western industrial society. We are now finding ourselves playing catch up with society like China. Nothing against the Chinese, I admire them, but nevertheless, modern technology was developed in the West. And it was destructive forces within the West that caused the manufacturing, the entire industrial society in the West to be hollowed out and to become uncompetitive. There was no imminent inherent necessity for it at all.
No, absolutely. I 100% agree. Just at the wayside, this Galen Windsor or Windsor-Galen figure was quite interesting because he actually ate plutonium and he swam in a reactor cooling vat. And he did not die of radiation. Actually, he made the claim that there is no such thing as deadly radiation in nuclear processes. So if that is true, then we should fully embrace nuclear, of course. But I think that this is a part of a broader theme with so-called environmentalism or nature movements, is that they claim to protect and want to promote the well-being of Mother Earth and our nature, but they frustrate all the time any projects that would actually help. Like you mentioned the frustration of nuclear energy, but likewise they are frustrating logging. And if you look at wood as a building material, it is one of the most sustainable things we have. And to the extent that the forest area in Europe grows each year, that's how much trees we are planting to offset what we log. But they keep frustrating logging businesses, and because that would be destructive to nature in their eyes also. And there are many initiatives like this that, for instance, hemp. Hemp is an amazing building material. If you combine hemp and concrete or cement, you get this thing called hempcrete. It is virtually everlasting. It is fireproof. It is insect-proof. It is structurally incredibly strong. And yet what we see is that hemp production is completely thwarted by rules relating to drugs, to soft drugs, to weed. And it seems to be it's a very schizophrenic thing to me that these nature lovers, or tree huggers as we call them here in Europe, that they continually thwart actual progress toward ecological goals. So that was so it is this disingenuous natural sentiment, as I would say. For instance, this is another controversial topic, just as a tangent here. Like eugenics, we hear a lot about eugenics momentarily because the extreme right would be in favor of eugenics, and yet nature itself is one giant eugenics machine. And you see here this discrepancy between the sort of sentimental bambification of nature. You know, they try to turn it to some sort of Disney product that is all lovely and all nice, and yet nature is a ferocious beast, and that this is simply not part of their worldview. So enough for me. Who would like to comment?
maybe
Yes, Hans?
just a remark on to what Michael said, and which brings us to also to the remarks by Alexander, because the practice that Michael describes on the treatment of dissidents in academic circles is a feminine way of doing. That's the way women work. If the women are anywhere in the majority, that's how they deal with dissident thought. Exactly the way you said about the academic environment in Canada. I have known the same environment in the Netherlands, in another field, in the sort of humanities departments, the same thing. So it's proof again that Alexander is right, and that there's sort of a drive towards femocracy.
All right. Charles, would you like to add anything to that?
Well, when you were speaking a moment ago, it just made me think about how we have earthquake-proof structures, but we don't have hurricane-proof structures or tornado-proof structures. But I think obviously they could be built based upon architecture like what you're referring to and other things I've seen. And yet people buy these trailers and mobile homes that are just made to be destroyed.
Yes,
I mean,
yes.
they're just junk, and they're just wholesale, promoted, pushed on people just so insurance companies can make money off of these people, I think. I mean, it's just a giant scheme. And the environment's part of it. And the so-called environmental movement, a large part of it, because 95 or more percent of the people don't understand the environment at all. They just talk about it constantly. They're a part of the scheme, whether they're knowingly a part of it or not.
Yes. Yes, that's very interesting. So, so any of you gentlemen have anything to add to this discussion? Well, then I think we should conclude. We have been at it for almost an hour. Thank you very much for this discussion. I think it was quite interesting to hear these various perspectives on climate change and its transcendental aspects, and its very nuts and bolts conspiracy origins. So thank you very much, and we will see you for the next episode.